All right. Well, I guess go ahead and jump in. Does everybody have the notes for today? Anybody have trouble getting those? They were either on the email or you can find them on the website. So, is
Thanks
there a
for, thanks for putting them in the email.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Is there a problem with any background noise on my end? Okay, cool. There's like a printer, and then there's Micah is taking a bath, so you can kind of hear it right through the walls, like the water running. So I didn't know if it was bothersome to anybody. Okay, cool. So so the notes are in the email or on the website. If anybody has trouble, find them. Just let me know. We don't mind stopping and working through it. We're looking at the importance of words today. So we've kind of this is kind of a shift in our discussion. We've looked at the last 3 weeks. We've looked at context. We've looked at the historical, cultural, and physical context, and we looked at literary context, and then we looked at biblical theological context. And just on that note, Francie sent me an awesome resource that's like kind of like a visual cross reference thing. So like if you know how cross references work in your Bible, they kind of in the columns or in the what are they called, like the margins to the side, they the editors will put in different verses that are like hyperlinks that are related to the passage that's to the verse that it's next to, and but the visual thing that Francie showed basically walks through every book of the Bible and shows like there's like we can share a link to it, but it shows how like in every chapter or whatever the different cross references it has, and it shows which books it relates to, and it's really cool. Even just more, it looks more in depth than just the standard cross reference because it shows connections to even like just kind of themes, and it really helps bridge the gap, especially of the seeing how Christ is the fulfillment of all these themes or Old Testament passages or the Old Testament storyline like we looked at last week. It really helps make some great connections. So Francie shared that with me last week sometime, and it was super helpful, and I should have just passed it along right away, but just talking about context made me remember that I'll share a link to that resource. Really cool. So thanks, Francie, for passing that on. So we look at three types of context, three aspects of context, three lenses of context, and that was
hello.
That was the three things that we looked at in the interpreting. We first look at how to observe Scripture and ask good questions. Then we look at interpreting Scripture, and then this week we're looking at another principle, another
today. So
skill and tool to.
They're done with that. We'll continue.
Looking at how to define keywords and do word studies in of those keywords in the original. So and so that's what we're doing today. So it's another interpreting the text section. Just the first things in your notes you guys can see is why do we do word studies? What are they? A little bit of what are they? So basically a word study is looking at taking a word and looking at it in the original language, trying to grasp what that word meant, not the English word, but the word either in the original Greek or in the original Hebrew, trying to figure out what it meant. And we do that primarily by looking at how that word is used throughout the New Testament, or throughout the Bible, either the New Testament or the Old Testament. That's what we're going to look at today. There is a little bit more in depth that you can go, but that is a primary, like, first huge step. And by looking at how it's used throughout the rest of the Bible is probably the best first step. And then there's some other resources, like some dictionaries or some word study resources, like if you've ever heard of Vines. Can't remember what it's called. I just call it Vines, but that that's a good resource we'll look at. And then there's also dictionaries, but you can use a Bible dictionary like we talked about, or a lot of like the Blue Letter Bible or Bible.org or Bible Hub. Like some of those resources will also have kind of some good helpful definitions that can help. But primarily what we're looking at is seeing how the rest of the Bible uses that word, and how the rest of the Bible's usage of that word helps us inform our study of that word that we're studying in our passage. So why do we do word studies? Now I'm getting into the notes section, but why do we do word studies? There's three reasons. Firstly is because many words in the Bible are just unclear, right? And they can bring clarity to either words that we no longer really use, or words whose English definitions we just really don't use. So, like, for example, in Romans 3:25, we read the word propitiation, that Christ was set forth as a propitiation. I've never used the word propitiation outside of like a paper that I had to write for seminary, or maybe a very bad sermon that I gave. Like, you just don't use that word propitiation, and nobody has a offhand, really easy, short way to define the word propitiation. So it can be helpful for us to do a little bit in words like that are unclear. We don't naturally know the meaning of that word, to do a little bit of research. And that's true even if there's words that we know the technical definition of the word. It's still, if it's not part of our natural language, we don't really own that meaning. So there's a sense in which we can know what a word means, and then there's but if we aren't using it, if it's not part of our regular vocabulary, we don't really know what the word means. So in the same way. So first, because to clear up unclear words. Secondly, is because sometimes the meaning of a Greek or Hebrew word, those are the two languages primarily that the Bible was written in originally, they can be obscured when translated into English. Now, that's maybe like the most common reason why, if you've ever heard of a word study, that's probably the most common reason given why you would want to do a word study, is because stuff gets lost in translation. And there's really, that can get overblown, like the amount that can get lost gets exaggerated, and it can be easy to think like, if I don't know the original languages, if I don't know what this word really means, or what this word is in Hebrew, then I'll never really be able to study the Bible accurately. That's not true at all. And there are also like some preachers or teachers that kind of hold the original languages up as like, the perfect scale, the pinnacle of being able to interpret the Bible is to be able to know the original languages. And that's not true at all. But there is an element in which knowing what a word means in its original language can be helpful in certain cases. So so like, and one example would be like the word steadfast love. It's used in the Old Testament. Sometimes it's translated that in the Psalms particularly, or maybe loyal love, or maybe enduring love, or faithfulness. Sometimes it's translated. There's a lot of ways ways that word is translated, and that's because there's a lot of different angles and nuances to that original Hebrew word that one English word can't convey. So it's important to kind of get into to understand those nuances as we're studying a passage. But then thirdly, words are important, and as we've said, they change their meaning from context to context and from time to time. So you can see the example there I give is the word saved. same, same root word that we get the word salvation from, or when we say, Jesus saves us from our sin. It's the Greek word sozo, and you can see it's used in the kind of the classic Christian way in Titus 3, when he says he saved us not on the basis of our deeds we have done, but by grace. But then it's used two other ways that are not kind of stereotypical of the way we think about salvation. First is in Acts 27, you see that from then on, all our hope of being saved was gradually abandoned. And in the context there, we could look at it, but just for the sake of time, in the context there, it's talking about Paul is on a ship and they've been shipwrecked, and he's saying their hope of being saved from a shipwreck is being abandoned. So that's a very different meaning than eternally saved from hell by grace, right? They're very different meanings of the word saved. And then in 1 Timothy 2:15, we read that women are saved through childbearing. And if what Paul means by that is that you receive eternal salvation just by bearing a child, then that's a radical, that's a pretty weighty interpretation. So, but I don't think that's what's being said there. I think our meaning of the word saved is different. So it changes in the context. So we can't impose a meaning of a word that we know to be true in one context automatically onto the same word in another context. That's why it's important to dig in and to see how it's used in other contexts, and that will inform us what it means in the context that we're particularly studying. So, any questions on that? Cool. Okay. I kind of want to do a poll. I think I have an ability to do a poll here, and it might be unanimous. Let me see. Oh, no. Never mind. This takes a little bit of setup. Never mind. I was going to do a poll, but it takes a little bit of setup, so never mind. Okay. Let's do this small group exercise. Oh, shoot. And I was supposed to figure out this, too. How do we do this? How do we do breakout rooms? Should have thought about this first. So what I was hoping, I know there's a way that we can do breakout groups where like each of us can only talk to like 2 or 3, but and I thought that would help us do this, but I forgot to prep and figure out how to do it. So does anybody know how to do a breakout room in Zoom? Okay. Well, I thought it would be more intuitive than that. So, oh, there's Justin. What's he doing here? Is he coming to help me figure this out?
Yeah, I was trying to see where's the other. See,
I don't know if I can see it from my side.
My lovely wife here has a Mac, and that is was not something we discussed before marriage.
What about like?
Uh,
Oh, sorry, my mouse got lost.
Can you be a Christian and own a Mac?
Time will tell if she perseveres, if the saint perseveres.
What about? Or do you have to be the one?
Oh. I wonder if I have to be.
Maybe you have to be the one that.
Yeah, you might.
Initiates.
You might have to be the manager.
Yeah. What is it called?
I saw
breakout.
Yeah, it was under
something like that. Let me see if I can.
Okay.
It's really fine if we can't figure it out. We can do this as a big group. But
We're patient.
okay. I thought you guys were holding me to a higher standard. But I guess you're all in the comforts of your own home, so the worst that could be happening right now is that you're getting too far ingrained into your sofa. But I even set a reminder on my calendar to look this up this morning, but I forgot. So is Justin like trying to figure this out? Because we don't need to if we
Yeah, he's looking on, because I think you have to be the one initiating the meeting.
yeah, okay.
Hey, Ross,
Yeah,
you see account management and account settings?
I do not.
You don't have account management as the administrator?
I don't see anything. I see manage participants.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have account settings?
I'm sure I can go to the website.
Here's what I'm reading. In the navigation menu, click account management.
Okay.
Did you hear me?
Yep, and then account settings.
Yep.
Yep. Navigate to breakout room in the meeting tab.
Okay.
All right.
I'm
Are you
not,
seeing that?
not yet.
Huh. Under the meeting tab in the account settings.
Oh, there we go. Breakout room. There we go.
You just need to turn that on. And then you should have a little checkbox that says allow host to assign participants when scheduling.
Oh, when scheduling. Oh, okay. So it's something that you have to do prior.
Okay.
Is that what I'm reading? Is that what you're telling me? When scheduling.
If you want to make this a manager of volume, you just click. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you there, son.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it seems like if it has to be done during scheduling, then it has to be done prior. And it's hard to know because we don't know everybody Wallace come in. So, all right.
I don't know where our navigation is because I'm not really.
What are you seeing, Justin?
Yeah, I just pulled my laptop up. I was playing with it. On the YouTube video, there was options at the bottom of the screen, but I don't see that on my manager options.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. We can. I'll play with that. Maybe we can try it next week or something. But it sounds like it has to be like a scheduled in advance to do that. So cool. Okay. Well, either way, I think we can. We'll just do this all together. So sorry about that, guys. I know you guys were all super excited about breakout groups, but. Okay, so can can we, so this exercise is just to get kind of a taste for what a word study looks like. And we'll just kind of one aspect of word study. So we're going to look at the word service or worship, sometimes translated worship, in the New Testament. And we're going to be studying it particularly from the lens of Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. So would somebody be willing to just to read Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, just so we can get a little bit of taste of this in context?
I can read.
Okay,
I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.
okay, cool. So we're going to look at that word worship. It's in this context, it's called spiritual worship. Or does anybody have a different modifier there? Does anybody have anything other than spiritual in their translation? The NIV has true worship, and that's because they don't know how to translate it, so they just go with the most vague. But yeah, what?
The New King James uses the word reasonable service, which is your reasonable service.
Reasonable is, that's a reasonable translation of that word. And then does anybody have, so New King James has service. Anybody else have service instead of worship in their translation?
Yes. New King James.
Yeah, New King James. Okay. So cool. Okay, so that's the word we're looking at, worship, service. We're not looking at spiritual or reasonable, but it's just interesting to me. So so worship there. What does that mean? It says this is true, this is spiritual, this is reasonable worship. So we're going to look at, okay, what does that mean? What is biblical worship? At least this word. This word, and it's the Greek word is pronounced, as you can see, latreia, and it occurs 4 other times in the New Testament. So what I'd love for us to do is somebody take each of the other 4 occurrences and read those verses in context out loud to us. So can somebody take John 16:2? Did somebody raise their hand? Sorry, I looked down. Somebody take.
I will.
Okay, awesome, Francie. John 16:2. And maybe, actually verses 1 through 3. John 16, 1 through 3, just for a little bit of context. And then somebody, Romans 9:4. Okay.
Do that.
Hold on.
Or Dean's got that. And then Mom, can you read Hebrews 9:1?
Yes, I will.
And can somebody read Hebrews 9:6? Jessica? Okay, cool. Jessica will read Hebrews 9:6. All right, so we're gonna read it, and then we'll just make some brief comments about it, about each one, observations that we see about how it's used, and then we'll kind of answer. In doing that, we'll just kind of answer the second question as we go, which is how do the other 4 uses of latreia in their context shed light on its meaning in Romans 12:1. So keep that question in mind as we're reading each of these 4. Okay, so Francie, can you start us off?
Sure. I have said all these things to you to keep you from falling away. They will put you out of the synagogues. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think he's offering service to God, and they will do these things because they have not known the Father nor me.
Cool, awesome. So that word is translated, what Francie read as service. And and they are offering a service when they kill you and when they put you out of the synagogue. So those are two acts or assumed acts of service or worship that we learn. So okay. Any other observations about what service means from that context?
It's for God. They're doing it for God. They think they
Yeah,
are.
okay. Yeah. So it's Godward. So service toward God. Yeah, not toward a person. Yeah, okay. That's good. That's actually a really good insight. So what's next? Who had Hebrews 9? Was that you, Dan? Had Hebrews 9 or Romans 9?
Romans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just whatever, like kind of
Um.
maybe the verse or two around it or something.
Okay. With Christ as my witness, I speak with utter truthfulness. My conscience and the Holy Spirit confirm it. My heart is filled with bitter sorrow and unending grief for my people, my Jewish brothers and sisters. I would be willing to be forever cursed from Christ if that would save them. They are the people of Israel, chosen to be God's adopted children. God revealed his glory to them. He made covenants with them and gave them his law. He gave them the privilege of worshiping him and receiving his wonderful promises. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are their ancestors, and Christ himself was an Israelite as far as his human nature is concerned. And he is God, the one who rules over everything and is worthy of eternal praise. Amen.
Cool, awesome. So there, it's in verse 4. It's kind of at the end of the verse. It's the context is worship, or all those things that have been particularly given to the people of Israel, and in particular, that thing is worship in the temple or temple worship, or how does your translation put it, Dan?
Yeah, worshiping him, the privilege of worshiping him.
Yeah, okay. So that kind of leaves out the temple reference, but yeah, so and then the promises, the covenants, the keeping of the law. So there's all these ceremonial covenantal blessings and rights and privileges that the Jewish people have been given, and one of those things is worship. So they've been granted worship. Any other insights on what worship means from that context? Okay, let's do Hebrews 9:1.
I think that's me.
Yeah.
Try that again.
Do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Hebrews 9:1. Then indeed, even the first covenant had ordinances of divine service and the earthly sanctuary.
Okay, yeah, and then read verse 2.
For a tabernacle was prepared, the first part, in which was the lamp stand, table, and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censers and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that had the manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And then actually, the next verse is same context, but we'll read that second. So here we see a worship being described as the regulations for what was done in the earthly sanctuary, and then it goes into huge detail about what this looked like with the Holy of Holies and the curtain and the incense and everything else, and the Ark of the Covenant. So specifically to what was done in the tabernacle, the regulations that God gave for worship in the tabernacle. And then Jessica, could you read verses 6 and 7?
Okay, these preparations having thus been made, the priests go regularly into the section performing their ritual duties, but into the second only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, and not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the unintentional sins of the people.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So there, it's translated, at least in the NIV, as to carry out their ministry, or yours had like to carry out their priestly duties or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ritual duties.
Ritual duties. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have a different translation or a more unique translation of that verb?
The NASB keeps using the words divine worship.
Divine worship. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder how the NASB translates Romans 12:1, but so okay, so what stands out? What was similar? What as we looked at each of those passages, was there a common theme, or was there something that stands out to you as significant or unique about worship? This word that's translated worship, latreia.
Ross, you asked about Romans 12:1 in the NASB. It is interesting. It does throw a little zing to it. It says, which is your spiritual service of worship.
Spiritual service. Okay. Yeah. So in
So it's
Hebrew,
combining a couple of those themes together.
Yeah, for sure. But in Hebrews, it's divine worship, and then in Romans, it's spiritual active service. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So anything from John, from Romans 9, and from Hebrews, anything that we learn about that word worship?
There seems to be kind of just the theme of how you approach God.
Okay.
The way in which you do that, like with the tabernacle and the priests and the Israelites having that privilege. Yeah. It was very, at least in the Old Testament, very spelled out how it was supposed to take place.
Yeah. So there's a weighty reverence to that word about how we approach God. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Anything else?
Seems like they all have to do with like obedience to God. Like they're talking about the law and like following what God told them to do, and so that's their worship, is like obeying that.
Yeah, totally, for sure. So there's a we worship in a way that is instructed by God to worship him, right? There's even regulations or ritual worship, like there's a sense in which you follow the commands to worship God in the way that he has told us to worship him. With this, there's that kind of a sense, like this is kind of like dictated worship is the sense of that word. Maybe that's good. Or obedient worship, maybe a word. Yeah. So yeah, about being a slave to God. Where do you see that?
So I have a question, and I've never really thought about it before, but so is there another word for worship in the New Testament, or is it only mentioned 5 times?
Yes, that is a great question, and you're seeing something that we're going to touch on later, but yes, okay. There are other words for worship. Yeah, definitely.
In the New Testament?
Yes, in the New Testament, and there's lots in the Old Testament. So this is just one.
Oh, yeah.
This is just one aspect of worship. That's a good clarification, Francie. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Totally. So everything that we're saying is not universally applied to everything. This is the only thing that we can learn about worship, but it is what Paul has in mind when he says worship in Romans 12. That's what we're trying to. So do you see the distinction of what we're doing? Yeah, that's a great question. You're pointing out tension here for sure. Yeah. So yeah. So any other commonalities or insights? Yeah, I think you guys hit on a lot of everything that I could see. Even what Braden and Gabby are saying in the chat room is talking about service and service to God. That worship is done out of like an act of almost like servanthood to who God is, and very way that the priests were like God's servants. But the main thing that I think that we see in all these cases is that this is, as we've already said, this is this is worship with a lot of Old Testament, Old Covenant temple connotations. So this is the kind of worship that was done in the temple. It was reserved for Israel, and it's done in accordance with God's instructions to the priests and to the people of Israel in the Old Testament. That's especially what we see in Hebrews chapter 9 and 6. But even in John 16, where it talks about false acts of worship or mistaken acts of worship, what does it say? It says that they will throw you out of their synagogues and kill you, and thinking that in doing this and keeping their synagogue and their people clean, they will be doing an act of service to God. So that even there's kind of ritual synagogue or temple worship, as there's kind of those hints of that meaning even in John's usage of the word latreia. How does that help us understand what Paul is saying in Romans 12? Well, Paul is saying that our very lives, by offering our lives as a living sacrifice by the renewal of our mind and not being conformed to the pattern of this world, in that way we are doing a form of temple service and worship in the holiest form. Right? We are fulfilling all the Old Covenant commands to worship God in the Holy of Holies with the Ark of the Covenant. So this is where God's presence was. And so we are serving God in the presence of God in the holiest form. This is the ceremony, or this is the ritual that he now commands, is that our whole lives, every sphere, every aspect, every moment of our life is to be marked by that kind of temple worship. And it's not, we do these certain things and light these candles and make these sacrifices. It's our whole lives being renewed and not conformed by the pattern of this world, but our minds being renewed and our whole lives being offered as a living sacrifice. It's interesting, even in Romans 12, there's that temple worship kind of language with the sacrifice and things. So any other comments or questions about that? Yeah, Francie.
Okay, I'm just kind of thinking about this. I just looked in my concordance, which is very limited in the back of my Bible. But so I've never really pondered this before. Never thought about the word worship much in relation to words. Okay, so then I see in the back of my concordance there that there are other words used in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm guessing anyway. I haven't really taken a minute to look at it, but okay. So like in Revelation and in John, there must be another word there. So, okay. In that case, then in Romans, Paul very specifically chose a word that was used in conjunction with sacrifice, or like in Hebrews with temple worship.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to make that connection in the minds of the original reader, that when we chose to put our faith in Christ, we were putting our lives as a true sacrifice.
Yeah.
They would have gotten that probably better than we do, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think based on its use everywhere else in the New Testament, we can know that when the original readers would have read or heard the word latreia, like wouldn't have heard the word service or worship or spiritual, they would have heard the word latreia. Their minds immediately would have gone to, oh, that's temple worship. That's those are the connotations, that's the nuance that he's referring to. Yes, for sure. Now, there are a lot of other words that are used in the New Testament that we translate as worship, but they don't all carry those same connotations. There might be other aspects or nuances or angles on the idea of worship that they touch on that latreia does not touch on. So,
got it. Okay, yeah. Thank you. That's really
great. Yeah, that seems
insightful.
to be kind of what your original question was related to that, and I might not have answered that clearly. So, but thank you.
You got it. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So, so that's a little bit of just a taste of what I think the fruit of what can be done by doing a little bit of getting behind the weeds a little bit of an English translation and getting into a word study a bit. And you see, it's not magic, right? It didn't take knowing the original languages to get that insight. It's just taking some time to look at how it's used elsewhere and to glean some insight. So that's what we're going on. That's what we're hoping to do. So, but now I want to touch on some common word study mistakes. And the idea of a word study, it's somewhat popular, common. Many of you may have heard of the idea of doing a word study. Not everybody has. It's not like a something that is done regularly, but the idea of doing a word study or getting into the original languages is an idea, but I think there's a lot of myths about what that means. So I want to just briefly go over these, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but it'd be worth looking at later just to kind of help check ourselves as we go through. So firstly, the first thing is we don't study, in doing a word study, we're not studying the English word. So similar, this is a little bit of what Francie was touching on. If we look at the word worship and we at the English word worship and see how many times that's used, that can be a helpful and a fruitful study just for our own personal devotional and see how the Bible talks about worship. But that's not, we're not getting at what the original reader meant by that word and what the original audience would have heard. So we have to get into we have to look up, make sure that we're looking at the original word, and we'll talk about how to do that. If you're like, okay, what does that mean? We'll talk about how to do that. But just an example, the word paraklesis or parakaleo, we translate that a whole lot of different ways in the New Testament. We can translate that as comfort, appeal, encourage, exhort, and preach. That's the word given to the Holy Spirit, the title given to the Holy Spirit. So it has a huge, broad number of ways that it can be translated. So we have to keep that in mind. So if we're doing a word study on the word comfort, we're gonna realize, oh, comfort is also translated as appeal or encourage or exhort and preach. So we need to keep that in mind. Secondly, there's the idea of a root fallacy. The original root of a word does not determine its meaning. This is very common for us to assume that if a word has the same root word, it means the same thing or it's connected. But if you think about the word butterfly or pineapple in English, like a butterfly is not a fly that eats butter or a fly that is made out of butter. That doesn't compute. A pineapple is not apples that grow on pine trees. So those are the root words. But we can't just assume that since we know the meaning of the root word pine, then we know what a pineapple is, right? Because you can't combine them. So we have to keep that in mind. Secondly, we have to be aware that words change over meaning, or the meanings of word change over time. You can see the example of that, but the word power in Greek is related to our word dynamite. But we can't say that well, Paul has in mind dynamite when he's talking about power, because Paul has no idea what dynamite is. He's writing 1800 years before dynamite was existed, but you'll hear people talk about that. So anyways, and then we must not say that a word always means everything that it can means. So this is like the example in English is if when I say the word grasp, typically I either mean I'm grasping something like physically in my hand, or I'm grasping it intellectually, but I never mean both of those at the same time, right? But very rarely am I meaning both of those at the same time. In the same way, in the Hebrew authors can use a word that has two meanings. They're not meaning both. Very rarely are they meaning both of them at the same time. So that word that we talked about earlier, that's translated faithful love or steadfast love or loyal love in all the Psalms, it has a lot of weight and broad meaning about God's loyal covenant love that he's keeping to Israel, and his faithfulness and his enduring love. But it can also just be used to talk about love between two friends or something, or romantic love. So we can't just assume that every time that word is used, that it's talking about, has all these great theological implications for what that word means. So, and then we can't allow the frequency of a word's meaning to determine its actual meaning. So, so I just the other day, my mother-in-law called my son. She said that we are admiring him, like he's so cute that we admire him. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting use of the word admire. Like it's a legitimate use of the word, but 99 times out of 100, when we use the word admire, we're talking about I have respect or I look up to that person. We're not saying, oh, that person's so cute, I'm admiring him. Right? So there's a little bit of difference, a little bit of nuance of what that word admire means. And then you could also say that you have a secret admirer. And that's a whole different meaning of the word admire, right? That's more romantic kind of, I have romantic feelings for this person. Not, I think they're so cutesy cuddly like a baby, or I think I look up to them and respect them. So there's three nuances to that word admire, to that English word admire. And even though 99% of the time we think the word admire means honor or respect or to look up to, it doesn't always mean that. So we have to keep that in mind. And then sixth, we must not think that if we carefully studied a word, we have studied the entire concept of the word. And that's what Francie was getting at. Just because we study the word latreia doesn't mean we know everything that the Bible has to say about worship. We're just looking at that one or those 5 instances of the word worship. We're not learning everything there is to know about what the Bible teaches about worship. So we can't say, anytime we come across the word or the idea of worship, this is what the Bible means, or this is what we're talking about. Right? So, and then we must carefully consider all the biblical evidence. Sometimes when you're doing research and you're studying a passage, you don't like what you find, and that we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with yielding to the research, to the results of our research and the data. So, and we might find that out. So, any questions about any of those? Sorry, I just kind of went through those quickly, but. Is anybody like, okay, but now how do we do this? What does it look like? So that's what we're getting to next. Okay, so how to do a word study. We are going to, as an example of this, we're gonna walk through. There's 3 steps, and as we're gonna walk through these steps using the word, a word from Matthew 11:29, which is the passage that, if you've kind of been doing the homework, this is the passage that we've been looking at. So it's probably like a word that you've read before. And if you've been following along at all with the sermon series, it's a word that you've hopefully have read before. But Matthew 11:29, we're going to look at the word that's translated, at least in the ESV, as lowly. Let me read it for us. Matthew 11. Let me get to it first. Actually, would somebody be willing to read verses 28 through 30 for us?
I can read it.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Jill.
Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Awesome, thanks. So, so a lot of translations, like I said, the ESV translate that as lowly. The NIV, which is what I have right here, translate that as humble in heart. That's at the. It's so the phrase is gentle and humble in heart, so, or gentle and lowly in heart. Any other translations of that word that's lowly there? Either lowly or humble. Maybe meek. Maybe anybody have meek? You can raise your hand. Or yeah, anybody else have anything other than lowly or humble? Okay, cool. So that's how it's used. That's how it's used. So we're going to look at, okay, what does it mean for Jesus to call himself lowly? What does it mean? And notice he does say lowly in heart. So we're not going to look at the in heart part, but we're going to look at what does it mean for Jesus to be lowly. This is important for us to know what it means. How is Jesus defining himself? Because that's the reason that we're given. That's why we should come to him, or that's why we should take his yoke upon us, is because he's lowly. So if we want to be properly motivated to take Jesus' yoke, we have to know what is Jesus, what about Jesus is motivating us to take on his yoke upon him. And it says that he is lowly. So we're going to look into what that word means a little bit. So the first step in to do a word study is to choose your word. And we've already done that for this example because I chose it beforehand. But and then the second step is to determine what the word could mean. So that's going to be the second step, is to see, okay, what are all the possible ways that we could that we could interpret this word? What are the different ways that we could mean? And like we saw with the word admire, or even the English word love, in different contexts, the word means different things. And then thirdly, the third step is to decide what that word does mean in its context. Okay, so first step is choose your word, and we've already chosen our word for this example. But if you were studying a passage and you want to get into some words a little bit, there's three kind of helpful criteria that help us determine what words should we choose to do a little bit deeper study. First thing is look for words that are important, that kind of the meaning of the passage hinges on that word, what that word means. So big words, that seem to be important. Look for words that are repeated, that show up often. If it shows up often, the author is trying to emphasize something, so we should probably know what he's trying to emphasize. And then secondly, look for words that are unclear or difficult to understand, that you don't just naturally have like oh yeah, I know exactly what that means, or so something that's ambiguous, or something that's just that's very rare, that's rarely used in English. So yeah, and so we're looking at lowly in this particular example because of what I just said. This is how Jesus describes himself. So it's one of the major characteristics of Jesus one of what he says is his major characteristics, and the reason why we should come follow him and take his yoke upon him. So it's important to us. Are there, as you guys looked at those three verses, as Jill was reading them, what are some other important words that might be worthwhile to do a word study on if we had more time?
I think it would be good to know what yoke meant.
Yoke, yeah, for sure. Definitely. and there, we'll get into, we might get into that a little bit next week when we talk about figurative language, because there he's obviously talking figuratively. And so, but yeah, that's a word that the passage, the meaning of the passage or the application, the takeaway for the passage kind of hinges on what we mean by yoke. So yeah, that's a good word. And it's used twice, so it's also a repeated word. So any other words that you would say are either important or unclear or repeated?
Well, he links two adjectives together describing Christ, that he is gentle and lowly.
Yeah. So if we were really being honest, we'd look at both of them, but there's just a lot more occurrences of the word gentle, so it'd take a lot more time for us to look at them today. So we're just going to look at lowly. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, a couple other words that I would say are important is the word rest. That's a huge word. Like, what does it mean for Jesus to offer us rest? And also even the word heart. What does it mean for him to be lowly in heart? Yeah. So there's, I mean, you could spend, you could do a word study on every word, but that takes a lot of time. So it's good maybe to pick one or two, in a passage that are just keywords. So anyway, so that's choosing words. Secondly, we want to determine all everything that the word could mean. So all our options. We want to know what our options are. And we do this by coming up with a range of meaning. And that's just kind of a fancy term for, a list of all the ways that, a list of all the things that a word could mean, a list of all the definitions or connotations that a word could have. And we do this by finding the word in a concordance, which is we'll look at that a little bit, or you can look the word up on a website. Either blueletterbible.org is probably the easiest one for me. So I would encourage you, and this is where I'm going to kind of share my screen and walk through how I do this. But and you can use a book. It's called a concordance, a Strong's concordance. Or something. Does anybody have a Strong's concordance that they use or know how to use? So yeah, Ryan, yeah, that's what it looks like. There might be one. Yeah, okay, so you can see Ryan's. And Francie, you were mentioning a concordance. Is that in your Bible?
Yeah, my Bible has one, but I also have one like Ryan's.
Yeah.
So I tend to use. Oops, I tend to use the one on my phone more.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Just convenient. Yeah. And I know my parents have one, but so you can use a hard copy if you like paperback kind of, or film paper, or if you're just want to use a digital. That's what we'll look over today. I want to show you guys how to use Blue Letter Bible a little bit, but and there's other websites and there's other apps that you could download, but this is just the easiest. So you have. If you do some research and you find something that's good, you can share it with the group too. But this is one I prefer to use. So let's say we're reading, we see, okay, that's a key word right there, that word lowly. I want to look into that and see how it's used in the rest of the New Testament. Well, then you would you pull up your browser, your web browser. Oh, let me share my screen first. And I will. Okay, is that coming through for everybody? Okay, so you go to blueletterbible.org. Is it still sharing? Is that following along with everybody? Okay, cool. So then you can see the search bar here. You type in your verse. So we're in Matthew 11, 28 or 29. And then you pick your translation. I'm going to pick the ESV. Search. It's kind of keyed to the King James version because that's the Strong's, like it's kind of the Strong's Concordance, which is this is tied to, is based on the King James, at least the original one. So everything here is going to be keyed to the King James that we look at, but at least in the translation that we have, is I choose to use the ESV. So so you see your passage here. It gives you the whole chapter in context. This is our verse. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart. Click right here on this link of the verse. Is everybody? Yeah, I guess it's hard to follow along and watch me at the same time. So, and then it breaks down. It opens this up and breaks down the rest of the verse word by word in the original. So here it has the Greek that is meaningless to us right now, but then it breaks it down word by word. And you have the English right here. Oh, this is actually keyed to the NASB. I don't know why I thought KJV, but so it has the English word here. Then this is the Strong's number, and basically what Strong's number is this guy. I think his name was Strong's, or I don't know, but he basically assigned a number to each word, each main word in the New Testament, and then kind of there's a list, and so in the back of a Bible or in a database like this or in the Strong's Concordance, when you find the word, you find the word that you're looking for, then you see the number, the Strong's number, and then you look for the occurrences of that Strong's number word, which is the key to the original word. So it's not key to the English word, it's key to the Greek word. But for our cases, like doing it online, really kind of all you need to know is what buttons to click. So and not as much what's going on, but so here it has the English word, the Strong's number. So that's the number that that's assigned to the original word, and then it has the original Greek or Hebrew word, in this case Greek because it's in the New Testament. It has the word as it appears in the translation. Then it has the root word is this middle word, and then it has the transliteration, so how you'd pronounce it in English if you wanted to pronounce it in English. And the word is this first word to take is arrow in English, but and then if you scroll down, you will find the rest of the word, and it just breaks it down and word by word, and you find this word that's translated humble in the NASB or lowly in the ESV, and it's Strong's number G5011, so 5011, and it's pronounced tepenos if you're interested, or tepenos if you're interested. But so what you do is you just click on that number right there, and then now we're looking at the Strong's number 5011 right here, and the Greek word tepenos, and then you scroll down, you can see right here, this is I'll just kind of show you the important things. You see the part of speech is an adjective, so it's describing people that are lowly. You can see how many times it's used in the New Testament. It's used 8 times this is the modern Greek New Testament, is that abbreviation there. These other forms, this is the Textus Receptus, which is the medieval version of the Greek New Testament that the King James is based on. And then this is the LXX, the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament. So you can see how many times it's used in the Old Testament, in the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament. So, but for our purposes, we're just looking at this MGNT, the modern Greek New Testament, how many times it's used. It's used 8 times. So that's a good manageable number for us to look at here. So yeah, let me pause here at this point. Is anybody having like I am not following along at all, can we go back a step or two? Okay, so so then you can go down and you can see some aids here, some dictionary aids. We'll look at that later, but try not to use the aids until after you do the study, and then an outline of biblical usage. This outline of biblical usage is what we're trying to do. So we're trying to come up with an outline of biblical uses on our own. So to read at this is kind of like to take the sneak peek kind of cheat sheet version, but it's really good to use to try to do it on your own if you have the time. So so keep scrolling down, and there's some definition. This definition can be helpful. You can look at a definition here that Strong's gives, and then another definition that I don't know much about theirs. I don't know how helpful that is. It might be, but I don't know. So and then finally you get to the end here, and you see all the uses of the word tapenos, or that's translated lowly, in the Greek, in the New Testament. You see it's used 8 times, and it shows the eight verses. So you see first occurrence is in Matthew, and then we see it Luke, and it shows up in Luke 1:52. And then we see it in Romans, 2 times in 2 Corinthians, 2 times in James, and 1 time in 1 Peter. Okay, does that make sense? Everybody? I don't have everybody's voice or face when I share screen, so I can't see. So now would be a good time to, I don't write those down in the notes, I don't think. So now would be a great time to just kind of jot those down, because we're gonna leave this and try to answer the questions a little bit. But or you can just go to Blue Letter Bible on your own and try to do it. But so yeah. So I'll leave that there. Maybe I can share this link in the group chat.
Can you leave it there long enough that we can take a picture of it?
Yeah, sure. I was going to copy and paste it and share it, but that way you can look it up on your own. So
okay.
That work for everybody? That way you can have it real quick. And then I'll walk through that whole process one more time again, okay? So there's the link I shared in the group chat. Can I get maybe a show of hands of would it be helpful for me to walk through that again, or do we just want to see what the rest of it will look, what the rest of the process looks like? Would it be helpful to walk through that again? No, keep going. Okay, we'll keep going. Yeah, it's already 8:15. I would love to I would love to, walk through that with you if you want to. We can take some time to do that one-on-one or something like that. I totally am open to that if you want to learn how to use that website a little bit more. But okay, so we now that we know all the occurrences, you can pull that link up and see all the occurrences here. What we do, the next step is to, as we did with the word worship, is to look up each use of that word that's translated lowly or tapenos in its original context in the New Testament, and as we go, we take note of, okay, what do we learn about that word? What from the context? What do we learn about that word? About the sense of the word, of that meaning of the word as it's used in each of these particular contexts. Okay, so the first one is, let's see how we want to divide this up. Let's just do it like we did with the word worship. Well, who can take Luke chapter 1 verse 52? Okay, can Ryan, can you take, or Kelly, can you take Luke 1? And then Jessica, can you take Romans 12? And Francie, can you take, I'm just going in order here. Francie, can you take 1st or 2 Corinthians 7:6? And then Heidi, can you take 2 Corinthians 10:1? And then Mom or Dad, can you take James 1:9? And Andy, could you take James 4:6? And then Jill, can you take 1 Peter 5:5? So you other three are the lucky ones. So, okay, so Ryan, can you read Luke for us? Not the
Luke.
whole gospel, just that verse.
No. 1 what? Sorry.
152. Sorry.
What was that again?
52.
52. Sorry. Okay. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate.
Okay, cool. So what do we learn about the word humble? And there it's used, the word is humble estate. So what do we learn about that from this verse? The one way we can learn is we see what it's contrasted with. So it's contrasted with the mighty, meaning, and maybe we could have read that a little bit in more context, but it's okay. Mighty being the political mighty, those who are influential, those who have economic power and ability. So it's contrasted. Those of humble estate are those who then do not have economic power or influence or political power. So there we see some those kind of connotations. So as I'm reading this, I'm just making notes here. And as I went through this afternoon, I wrote humble estate equals economic humility, right? Contrasted to the political might, right? Those who occupy thrones, okay? So then can somebody read Romans 12? Who had that? I can't remember. Jessica, yeah. 12:16, maybe the verse or two around it.
Okay. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all.
Okay, great. So what do we learn about that? Anything about lowliness that we learn there in that verse?
It's a contrast with haughty.
Yeah,
lowly,
yeah.
Contrasted with proud.
Right. And it's pride is contrasted with associating with the lowly. Yeah. So there's the proud are those who won't associate with the lowly. Yeah. Okay. So contrast with proud. There's like a social aspect to this. Like if you associate with this kind of person, it will bring you down socially, right? So it's someone of lower social standing, somebody that you wouldn't want to associate it with. Okay, so then 2 Corinthians 7:6.
Okay. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus.
Yeah, okay. So that's the word down, it's translated downcast here. That's weird. That is not anything like lowly, like we've seen in the other two uses, where it's kind of social or economic or political. It's just the opposite of someone who's comforted. So somebody who's discouraged or something like that. So that's a very different nuance, a very different connotation, or a different nuance to that word, a different sense of the word. For sure. Yeah. Okay. What about 2 Corinthians 10, Heidi? Or right. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 Corinthians 10:1. Okay. By meekness and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you, I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but am bold when away.
Yeah, good. So that word, just you could see this on Blue Letter Bible. You might not be able to see it as we just read, but the word there that's translated humility is timid. It's translated timid here. So, wait, let me make sure that's true. I don't want to be lying to you.
That's what Blue Letter Bible has when I'm looking at it.
Yeah, so it's timid. It's not meekness and gentleness of Christ, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So timid. What do we learn? What do we learn about this word tapenos from 2 Corinthians 10:1 in that context? So it's tricky here because we see that it's used sort of paired with the gentleness and humility of Christ, but it's not exactly that. It's instead it's contrasted with boldness. So Paul's boldness to stand up to and confront the Corinthians is contrasted with his timidity or his lowliness, his humility. So there it's not talking about his economic influence or his social standing. You're not referring to him being discouraged. It's referring to his unwillingness to assert himself or to be confrontational. So there's kind of like a posture of heart is humble and lowly. So that's it's a different nuance of that word. That's translated as humility. It's the opposite of boldness or the opposite of assertive or confrontational. So, and then James 1:9.
Let the lowly brother glory in his exaltation, but the rich in his humiliation, because as a flower of the field, he will pass away.
Yeah, okay. So what do we learn about lowly or the word brother? I think every translation has brother or person, but it's actually just says lowly again. But what do we learn about that in this context?
Well, there's definitely that contrast again between the lowly brother and the rich.
The rich. So there's economic contrast. So he's saying the lowly person is the person who's not like the rich person, the wealthy person. So there's economic nuance or economic sense of the word lowly. Okay, and then in James 4:6, Andy.
Okay, but he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble.
Okay, yeah, what do we learn about humility there?
It's the opposite of pride.
Opposite of pride, yeah, okay, for sure. So, so that's a little bit of a nuance for sure. Opposite of pride, so no reference to economic, no reference to social standing, no reference to being discouraged or discomforted, but it's opposite of pride. And if you look a little bit earlier in the context, you'll see that it's actually in the context of quarreling or arguing, and so the idea is that it's someone who is not who's not the proud are those who fight and who quarrel and who argue, and the humble are those who do not. So there's a little bit of similarity with their Paul saying with where in 2 Corinthians 10 where it talks about Paul not being someone who asserts himself or is confrontational. So and then in 1 Peter 5:5, it's the same verse. Sorry, you don't have to read it, Joe, but it's the same quotation. It's very similar context to James 4:6. You can look at it later, but Peter quotes the same Old Testament verse that James does. God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And the context there is, again, in relational submission. So the verse before it is, younger men, submit yourselves to older men. And because God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. So there's some relational dynamics as someone who's willing to submit or subject themselves to someone else's authority. So again, no reference to money, no reference to political power, no reference to being discouraged or anything like that. Okay, so as we've been going through, we've been looking at all these uses of the word tapenos, and we've been taking notes of, okay, what do we learn about this sense of the word from this context? What would you guys say? I've been kind of voicing some of these categories, but I break down, there's three senses of the word lowly or tapenos in the New Testament that we see. What would you guys say are some of the, is one of the connotations or one of the possible senses or nuances that the word could have based on what we've looked at in those 7 other passages?
Well, you made reference to the economic or the monetary aspect of lowly.
Right. Yeah. So like where it's contrasted with the poor or the mighty in Luke or in James 1. Yeah, there's a sense in which lowly can just mean the poor person, right? So it's an economic lowness. Someone who's maybe vulnerable or has no room to be proud about their social standing. Okay. What's another sense of that, of the word lowly that we saw? There's one use that kind of doesn't fit with the rest. There's one verse that doesn't fit with the rest of them.
It seemed to be in 2 Corinthians 7:6 when it's talking about being discouraged.
Yeah. So certainly, yeah, that I would say is kind of the anomaly of all the 8 uses. Like nowhere else do we have reference to it being a lowly person being depressed or discouraged or downcast. Only there in 2 Corinthians 7:6. So that's interesting for us to take note of, but it doesn't really help us understand Matthew at all. Necessarily. So, but there is that sense of the word that discouraged. Yeah. So there's 2 senses. So there's like the economic or socially low person, and then there's the poor, and then there's the discouraged or downcast, and then there's kind of a third that third category that I see, at least. How would you guys summarize some of the other uses of the word tapenos?
Does it have a sense in which Paul uses the word as being timid or meek?
Yeah.
Lacking aggressive attitude?
Yeah, I would say that for sure. Yeah, so we see it in 2 Corinthians 10:1. There's Paul not being bold, not being assertive, but he's being timid. Like that's a unique translation. Or the word meek, like was what you used. That's a word that, it's a good word. It's not a word that we use in common everyday English, but it's a helpful word, I think. Yeah, so there's kind of like a humble posture and added like a way that we view people and view our relationships. We're not trying to assert ourselves or our own agendas, but we're lowly. We're humble in that way. So that's different than being a poor person or being a discouraged person, right? But you can see how they're all very related, right? and really the person who is humble and not assertive is simply operating out of their understanding, their ability to admit or recognize that they are low and that they actually have a low spiritual status. And then they're not trying to then assert themselves, their own agenda at the expense of other people. Okay, so which of those three kind of big those categories is most like what we see in Matthew 11? Or makes most sense in the context of Jesus's words in Matthew 11? We're jumping basically to step 3 at this point, but.
I guess I'll jump out there and say I think it's an attitude of meekness or humbleness.
Yeah. So Jesus is not saying that he's economically disadvantaged, right? That's not why we should follow him. And Jesus is not saying that we should follow him because he's depressed, right? He's saying that we should follow him because he has a low posture of heart. He has a humble posture of heart, and that he's not going to assert his own will or lead in a way that is at our expense or at the expense of those who follow him, like similar to Paul's use of the word. He's not bold. He's not aggressive or assertive. He is lowly. Now, is Jesus bold? Yes. Is Jesus aggressive? Yes. Does Jesus assert his own will? Yes. But in this context, what we're learning about Jesus is that he has a low and a humble posture, very similar to the proud, like or very similar to the opposite of the proud that God gives grace to. Jesus is not proud. He's not arrogant. He's not quarrelsome. Therefore, we can follow him because he's gracious. So once we decide which sense of the word makes best sense in our context, the context that we're studying, then we apply that, and then we reflect. You can see some questions that help us figure out what we learn about the word based on our study. So it's already past 8:30, so I'm kind of summarizing some stuff, but I'd love to, if you want to chat, you can shoot me an email or something if you have other questions about this, or or if you just want to go over how do I use Blue Letter Bible or a concordance or something like that, we can do that too. But I know it's getting a little late, so and I probably should go help with Micah's bedtime a little bit, but but is there any other questions about that? Sorry, we kind of had to breeze through some of that stuff. Cool. All right, I had fun. This is a good discussion for me. This is one of my favorite things, is looking at how a word is used throughout the New Testament, and how that shapes our understanding of a particular passage. It takes some work. It takes some mental exercise to figure out, okay, what was going on in the mind of this original author. But I think it pays off. The dividends are huge. So, so keep at it. At least give a stab at it doing a word study this week. There's in the homework, you're looking at the word redemption, which is a really cool word. It's used in Colossians 1, and it is a huge word. But to answer Francie's question about the word worship, this is the only word that's translated redemption in the New Testament. So as we study this word redemption, we're studying the entirety of what it means. And you can see it's not really used that often, but I think it'll be a really cool study of the word redemption. So I'd encourage you just to take a stab at it. And then if you have any questions, we can talk or email or whatever. So, but cool. I hope it was cool to study a little bit of Matthew too, and look at what it means to be lowly. I thought that was a cool study. Any other questions or final words before we depart? Cool. Awesome. thank you guys. If you guys want to stick around and chat, I'll be here I can stay on for a few more minutes, but it was good to see y'all. Thanks for reading a bunch of scripture for me. So, and study it with me. I didn't even pray at the beginning, and I feel really bad that I did not do that. So I know I said bye already, but let me just say a quick word of prayer in closing. So, cool. God, thanks so much for the opportunity to study your word. Would you allow us to go from here and be faithful stewards and apply it to our lives, that we might not just know what it says, but that we might follow it with our lives. So thank you for this time and the blessing to study your word, and we pray this in Christ's name. Amen. So, cool. Awesome.
Thank you very much. That's good.
All right. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ross. That was really good and very informative.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Francie. Yeah. I hope it was helpful.
I really appreciated that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good
Totally.
Good
Yeah.
night.
Thanks for.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Where's the
Okay. All right. I'm going to end the meeting here unless somebody had a question. But okay. Bye, Dan.